You have no right to live in this house. It belongs to us. I froze with my phone in my hand, standing in the middle of my own kitchen, hearing these words from a woman I had never seen before. At that same second, my phone screen lit up. A call from the bank. Your account has been temporarily frozen. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. My legs went weak. I looked from the stranger at my door to the phone shaking in my hand and suddenly understood one terrifying thing. Someone was trying to take everything I had. I'm really glad you're here. If you're reading this, please like this story, comment your city, and subscribe if you believe that the truth always finds a way out. Because what happened next almost broke me. But it didn't. That morning had started in my car. Not with panic. Not with tears. Just with the quiet discomfort that settles into your body when this has already become routine. I woke up before dawn in a parking lot on the edge of Sacramento. The sky was still dark, but thinning, like fabric worn too many times. A pale line of light rested low on the horizon. The seatbelt buckle pressed into my side where I must have rolled against it during the night. My neck ached. My lower back protested as I shifted. The back seat was filled with folded blankets, a spare jacket, and a cardboard box holding documents I kept rearranging as if order alone might save me. The air inside the car smelled faintly of old coffee, dust, and fabric softener from the blankets I washed at a laundromat once a week. I reached for my phone and immediately checked the battery. 6%. I turned it over in my hand, then placed it face down on the passenger seat again, as if ignoring it might slow time. 5:03 a.m. I stayed still for a while, listening. A delivery truck passed somewhere far off. A bird tested the morning with a single uncertain sound. The world was waking up, and I was trying to decide how visible I wanted to be. I whispered the same sentence I had been whispering every morning. Just a little longer. This is temporary. I'll be fine. I didn't fully believe it, but saying it out loud helped me sit up and reach for the coffee cup. The coffee was cold and thin. I drank it anyway. It reminded me that I still had habits, and habits meant I hadn't disappeared yet. I made a list in my head. Charge my phone at the library. Check job postings. Use the gym shower if my card still worked. Small plans. Manageable plans. I had learned to keep my expectations low. Survival didn't require hope. It required discipline. I was adjusting the side mirror when the knock came. Sharp. Sudden. I flinched so hard I hit my knee against the dashboard. For half a second, fear rushed in, police, security, someone telling me I couldn't stay here. Then I saw him. Michael. My brother stood on the other side of the glass, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, his breath fogging the window. He looked thinner than I remembered. His hair had gone more gray than brown, especially at the temples. His posture was careful, as if he already understood what he was seeing. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. I rolled the window down slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't ask questions. He didn't say, "What happened to you?" He just said my name, quietly, the way he used to when our mother was sleeping in the next room. Then he reached into his pocket and placed something small and cold into my palm. A key. The metal pressed into my skin, grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. "Come stay for a while," he said. No explanations. No timelines. I stared at the key. It felt heavier than it should have. Not just metal. Responsibility. History. Pride rose immediately. Automatic. Familiar. I opened my mouth to argue, to insist I was fine, to pretend this was still temporary in a way that didn't require witnesses. But exhaustion won. I closed my fingers around the key. I nodded once. I didn't know then that accepting it would make me visible again. I didn't know someone else already knew about the house. About the paperwork. About the space my life still occupied on paper. That morning, sitting in my car with a key warming in my hand, I thought I was finally safe. I was wrong. The first week passed quietly. Too quietly. After the car, after the key, after Michael's spare bedroom with its freshly painted walls and the faint, clean smell of detergent, my body began to relax. I unpacked slowly, placing each item where it felt natural, as if careful order could convince the world that I belonged here. I washed dishes that were already clean. I folded towels that didn't need folding. Routine was my camouflage. I told myself I was invisible now. That nothing could reach me here. Then the transfer was frozen. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I remember because the light was unusually soft, filtered through thin curtains, touching the floor like something cautious. I was sitting at the small desk by the window, sorting papers Michael had insisted I organize properly, insurance forms, old tax statements, things that proved I existed on paper. When I logged into my bank account, the balance looked normal. Too normal. I tried to move money between accounts. A warning appeared. Transfer under review. I refreshed the page. Again. The balance stayed frozen, untouchable, like an image behind glass. My chest tightened. I called the bank. I waited on hold, listening to cheerful music that felt almost mocking. When a representative finally answered, her voice was smooth, professional, distant in the way people sound when they are trained not to care too much. "There seems to be a dispute," she said. "A dispute?" I repeated. "About what?" She hesitated. "Regarding the ownership status of the property associated with this account." I stared at the screen. "There must be a mistake," I said. "Nothing has changed." Another pause. "You may want to check your mail," she replied carefully. The letter arrived the next day. A white envelope. Official seal. My name printed neatly, impersonally, as if this had nothing to do with my life. Inside, the paper smelled faintly of toner and glue. "You are illegally occupying this property." I read the sentence 3 times before it made sense. Illegally. Occupying. According to the letter, documentation had been submitted challenging my right to live in the house. Ownership was under review. Further action was possible. My hands began to shake. This wasn't confusion. This was accusation. Then the calls started. Unknown numbers. Voicemails without names. Voices that sounded calm, almost kind. "You should leave before this becomes complicated. This can still be handled quietly. You don't want this on your record." I stopped answering. At night, the house felt different. Every sound seemed louder. The refrigerator cycling on. A floorboard shifting. A car passing outside. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter folded and unfolded so many times it had softened. The room smelled of fresh paint and something sharp underneath, fear, maybe, or adrenaline. The key lay on the nightstand. For the first time since Michael placed it in my hand, it didn't feel like safety. It felt like evidence. I understood then that this wasn't random. Banks don't freeze accounts by accident. Legal threats don't appear without planning. Someone had filed paperwork. Someone had signatures. Someone wanted me removed. Not loudly. Quietly. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I started documenting everything. Dates. Times. Phone numbers. I saved every voicemail. I took screenshots of every notice. I photographed the envelope before throwing it away. I wrote notes by hand, because writing made things feel real and controlled. Fear sharpened my attention. By the end of the week, one truth had settled heavily inside me. This wasn't about the house. It was about erasing me from it. And whoever was doing this wasn't panicking. They were patient. I sat on the edge of the bed with the letter in my lap, the paper already soft at the folds from how many times I had opened it just to make sure I hadn't imagined the words. The room still smelled like fresh paint, clean, slightly sweet, the scent landlords use to convince you a place is new and safe. But that smell didn't comfort me. It pulled something loose inside me. Because the last time I smelled paint that sharp and new, I was standing in my mother's apartment with my sleeves rolled up, a streak of white across my wrist, and Mom laughing at the mess we were making. "Don't fuss," she'd said, waving her brush like a baton. "No one dies from a crooked line." She'd been wrong, of course. People die from all kinds of crooked things. They just don't always announce them. I pressed my thumb into the edge of Michael's key on the nightstand, grounding myself in the present, and the memory still came anyway, uninvited, immediate, complete. In moments like this, the past doesn't knock. It walks right in and sits down. When Mom died, everything in our family shifted as if the floor had been tilted. Michael and I didn't fight at first. We did the polite grief, the practical grief. We sorted drawers. We carried boxes. We canceled subscriptions. We signed papers. We spoke softly over cold coffee and pretended the quiet between us wasn't widening. But grief has a way of sorting people too. Michael threw himself into building his business. He was always capable, always restless, always certain that effort could fix what life broke. I admired that in him once. Then I began to resent it, because my own life didn't respond to effort the same way. After Mom's funeral, I went back to work and tried to pretend the world hadn't changed. I sat in meetings and smiled at jokes I didn't hear. I answered emails with a steady hand while my chest felt hollow. My job had always been dependable, boring, but stable, and I told myself stability was enough. Then the company restructured. That's the word they used, as if it were neutral, as if it didn't mean people being erased from payroll with a polite handshake. I was offered a smaller role, fewer hours, less pay, and the same expectations. When I hesitated, my manager looked at me with that rehearsed sympathy people use when they want you to accept losing without making it messy. I took the cut. I told myself it was temporary. But temporary has a way of settling in. Bills didn't wait for me to recover. Rent didn't pause for grief. And when my landlord raised the price to match the market, I smiled like I understood and went home to do the math that made my stomach tighten. I didn't call Michael then. Pride kept my mouth shut. So did bitterness. Somewhere in my mind, I had decided he had moved on without me, and I didn't want to beg for a place in his life. We stopped talking in small stages. First fewer calls. Then shorter ones. Then birthdays reduced to a text. 2 years went by like that, quiet distance wrapped in the excuse of being busy. Meanwhile, I shrank my own life down to what I could carry. I sold furniture. I canceled little comforts. I learned which grocery stores marked things down early and which gas stations were safer to park near if I needed to close my eyes for an hour. I didn't tell people I was sleeping in my car. I didn't even say it to myself in a complete sentence for a long time. I told myself I was between places. I told myself I was figuring things out. I told myself anything except the truth, because the truth sounded like failure when spoken aloud. And still, Michael came back. That morning in the parking lot, when he knocked on my window and put the key in my hand, he didn't ask for a confession. He didn't demand an explanation that would let him feel superior. He just looked at me the way he used to when we were children, like he could see the whole situation without me having to describe it. "You can stay," he said. That's it. I remember wanting to cry then, not because I was weak, but because my body was exhausted from carrying my life alone. Relief does that sometimes, it cracks you open more than pain. I moved into his house carefully, like a guest who didn't trust kindness. I cleaned without being asked. I kept my belongings small. I watched his routines so I wouldn't disrupt them. I tried to be invisible even while accepting his help. And then, 1 week later, the bank froze the transfer. The letter appeared. The calls began. Sitting there with the smell of paint in my nose and my mother's voice in my memory, I finally understood what fear was really saying to me. This wasn't just a threat to a roof. It was a threat to the only person who had returned for me. And I couldn't let that happen. The doorbell rang one morning just after 9. I remember the time because I was standing at the sink, rinsing a mug, listening to the steady sound of water, trying to keep my hands from shaking. The house was quiet in the careful way it had been all week, as if it knew better than to draw attention to itself. I dried my hands on a towel and went to the door. 3 people stood on the porch. A woman in her late 40s with perfectly styled hair and a soft beige coat stepped forward first. Behind her was a man with a pleasant, forgettable face, holding a paper bag. A younger woman stood slightly apart, her arms crossed, her eyes already scanning past me into the house. "Hi," the first woman said warmly. "I'm Susan. This is Brian. And Kate." She smiled as if we were already acquainted. "We're your cousins." The word landed strangely. Not heavy, not sharp. Just misplaced. "I didn't know I had cousins nearby," I said. "Oh, families lose touch," Susan replied easily. "Especially after losses. We heard you'd been through a hard time." Brian stepped forward and held out the paper bag. "We brought pastries. Just to say hello." The bag smelled like sugar and yeast. Normal. Harmless. I let them in. They filled the living room quickly, choosing seats without asking. Susan commented on the paint. Brian admired the windows. Kate said nothing at all. She watched. They asked questions in a way that felt casual but wasn't. How long had I been staying here? Was the house fully paid off? Did Michael live alone? Susan laughed lightly as she asked, brushing invisible crumbs from her sleeve. "We're just trying to place things in our heads. You know how it is." I did know how it was. People who are truly curious don't rush. People who are counting do. They stayed less than 20 minutes. Long enough to look around. Long enough to note where I sat, where the hallway led, what kind of locks were on the doors. As they were leaving, Susan touched my arm. "We should do this again," she said. "Family shouldn't be strangers." That afternoon, my neighbor caught me by the mailbox. She leaned in and lowered her voice. "Those people this morning, were they friends of yours?" "Family," I said, testing the word. She frowned. "They were taking pictures of the house." The air seemed to thin around me. That night, I checked my bank account again. Nothing had changed. The warnings were still there. The restrictions still in place. The next day, a notice appeared online showing my mailing address had been changed. Not by me. Then came an anonymous complaint filed with the city. Then a letter questioning my residency status. Then a call asking whether Michael was the legal owner or merely an occupant. The pattern was no longer subtle. I began documenting everything. I saved screenshots. I wrote dates in the margins of envelopes. I recorded voicemails and labeled them carefully. I didn't tell Michael yet. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I needed to understand the shape of the threat before I handed it to him. Susan called once. Just once. Her voice was friendly. Concerned. "We're hearing some confusing things," she said. "It might be best if you stepped back and let the rightful owners sort this out." I asked her who the rightful owners were. She smiled through the phone. I could hear it. "That will all become clear." When I hung up, my hands were steady. Because by then, I already knew one thing for certain. They weren't family. They were hunting. And whatever they thought I had, they believed it was worth the trouble. Everything escalated faster than I expected. What had begun as quiet pressure turned into movement, paperwork shifting, systems updating, invisible hands rearranging my life without touching me directly. Each morning brought a new detail that didn't belong, something slightly wrong, slightly off, but serious enough to matter. A notification from the postal service confirmed my address had been officially changed. Not requested. Not authorized. Still processed. A utility company called to confirm a cancellation I hadn't made. A lender sent a notice asking for clarification of ownership. A city office left a message requesting documentation to avoid further action. The house itself felt unchanged, but my place inside it no longer did. I stopped leaving my phone unattended. I slept lightly, waking at every unfamiliar sound. The refrigerator hum became a warning. Footsteps outside made my heart stall. Fear settled into my body not as panic, but as constant alertness, the kind that sharpens your hearing and drains you at the same time. I began documenting everything in earnest. I created folders. Physical and digital. I labeled them by date and category. Bank. Mail. Calls. Visits. I recorded my own voice each night, summarizing what had happened, because I'd learned that memory softens under stress and I needed mine sharp. Michael noticed, of course. "You're not sleeping," he said one evening as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The light above us hummed faintly. He had learned not to press too hard, but this time his concern outweighed his restraint. I told him everything. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just facts. The cousins. The photos. The forged address change. The bank freeze. The letters. His jaw tightened in a way I recognized from childhood, the expression he wore when something crossed from irritation into resolve. "This isn't family," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's organized." That night, we reviewed the paperwork together. Michael moved through documents with practiced efficiency, noting inconsistencies, signatures that didn't match, timelines that made no sense. "This is deliberate," he said. "And sloppy." That was when the final piece surfaced. A name buried deep in an old email thread. A connection that at first seemed irrelevant, then unmistakable. Michael's former business partner. A man who knew his finances. Knew his assets. Knew his weaknesses. And more importantly, knew how to hide behind others. Susan wasn't leading anything. She was presenting it. Brian and Kate were not relatives. They were placeholders. Faces. Cover. The plan had been designed by someone who understood leverage and delay, someone who knew that pressure didn't need to be loud to be effective. We didn't confront him. We prepared. Michael contacted a lawyer he trusted. I organized my evidence into a timeline. We cross-referenced bank records with call logs. Camera footage from a neighbor confirmed Susan photographing the house. Metadata placed her phone near the property multiple times. Every thread led back to the same source. What they didn't know was that I had been invisible once. I knew how to survive without being seen. And now, I knew how to be precise. The next step would not be private. It would be public. And once it was, there would be no room left for them to pretend this was a misunderstanding. We didn't call it a confrontation. We called it a meeting, because meeting sounds civilized, and civilized things are harder to refuse without looking guilty. Michael's lawyer scheduled it for a Friday afternoon in a neutral office downtown, glass walls, beige carpet, the kind of place where people lower their voices automatically. The email invitation was simple, a discussion to resolve the ownership dispute and stop the ongoing interference with banking and residency records. Susan replied within 10 minutes. "Of course," she wrote. "We welcome clarity." That sentence alone told me everything. People who expect clarity don't hurry to welcome it. Michael and I arrived early. I wore plain clothes and brought a folder so thick it bent at the corners. Inside were printouts and screenshots, dates and timestamps, bank notices, copies of the forged change of address request, call logs, and photos from the neighbor's camera. I also had a flash drive, because digital proof is only useful if it's in the room when someone tries to deny it. The lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, shook my hand and spoke to me like I was competent, not fragile. That mattered more than I expected. "Let them talk," he said quietly. "People reveal themselves when they think they're winning." Susan arrived first, bright lipstick, clean perfume, her smile set like a mask. Brian followed with the same pleasant emptiness as before. Kate came last, eyes sharp, scanning the room as if measuring exits. And then the man I had been expecting, but hadn't wanted to see, walked in behind them. Michael's former business partner. He didn't introduce himself to me. He didn't need to. The ease with which he took a seat told me he believed he owned the space. Michael's shoulders stiffened beside me, but his voice stayed calm. "This is about the false claims and the bank interference," he said. "It stops today." Susan tilted her head, expression wounded. "We're simply protecting what belongs to our family." Caldwell slid a document across the table. "This is your claim. This is the signature. And this is the submission metadata." Susan glanced at it like it was boring. "I don't understand what you're implying." I opened my folder. One page at a time. First, the change of address request, forged. Then, the bank's notice referencing a dispute tied to that request. Then, a timeline showing Susan's visits aligned with each new report. Then, the neighbor's footage, Susan holding her phone up, taking photos of the house. Susan's smile tightened. "That doesn't prove anything." Brian cleared his throat. "This is harassment." Kate finally spoke, her voice flat. "You people are making this into a drama." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I turned to Caldwell and nodded once. He opened his laptop and pressed play. At first, it was just sound, room tone, a faint rustle, then voices. Familiar ones. Susan's voice, unmistakable, speaking with casual certainty. "Once the bank freezes it, she'll panic. She'll leave. That's the point." Brian laughed softly in the recording. "And if she doesn't?" Then the man's voice, Michael's former partner, low and controlled. "Then we make it uncomfortable. Reports. Notices. Pressure. She's temporary. Paper is permanent." Silence filled the room like a physical thing. Susan's face changed first. The warmth drained away, leaving something hard underneath. Brian's hands went still. Kate stared at the table. Michael didn't move. He just watched them, the way you watch people when you finally accept what they are. Susan stood abruptly. "This is fake." Caldwell didn't blink. "We have the original file. The chain of custody. And the forensic confirmation." The man, Michael's former partner, leaned back, eyes narrowing, recalculating. He looked less like an authority now and more like what he was, someone caught. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Susan's chair scraped the floor as she pushed away from the table. "This is ridiculous," she said, voice too loud. "We're done here." Caldwell slid one final document forward. "No. You're done when the court says you're done. Until then, you will have no contact. No filings. No interference. And if you try again, it becomes criminal." They filed out without apology. Not a single one of them looked at me as they left. And strangely, that was a relief. Because I didn't need their shame. I only needed the truth to be seen. When the door closed behind them, the room didn't immediately feel lighter. It felt empty in a different way. We stayed seated for a moment, Michael, the lawyer, and I, listening to the muted sounds of the office building returning to normal, footsteps in the hallway, a phone ringing somewhere, the low murmur of voices behind glass walls. Life moving on, indifferent to what had just ended. Mr. Caldwell gathered his papers neatly. "You did exactly what you needed to do," he said, looking at me directly. "From this point forward, they have no ground to stand on." I nodded, but the words didn't land yet. Relief doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small, delayed waves, and the first one is usually exhaustion. By the time Michael and I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun had softened. The city looked the same as it always had, which felt strange. I had expected something to look different. Brighter. Quieter. More resolved. Instead, my hands started to shake. Not from fear this time. From release. Michael noticed immediately. He didn't say anything. He just placed his hand lightly on my back and guided me toward the car. That simple, familiar gesture undid me more than the confrontation ever could have. At home that night, the house felt still again, but not watchful. Just still. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself cry. Not loudly. Not dramatically. The kind of crying that empties you from the inside out. I cried for the weeks in my car, convincing myself I deserved it. I cried for the way fear had crept into my sleep. I cried for how close I had come to disappearing quietly. And then, slowly, something else surfaced beneath the tears. Relief. No one was knocking. No phone was ringing. No voice was telling me to leave. The silence was mine again. In the days that followed, things resolved themselves methodically. The bank restored my access and issued a formal apology. The forged filings were flagged and removed. A restraining order was issued, clean and firm, outlining boundaries in language that left no room for interpretation. The house was protected. My money was secure. My name was cleared. But the real shift happened somewhere less visible. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. I stopped flinching at every unfamiliar sound. I caught myself making plans that extended beyond tomorrow, small ones at first, then larger, steadier ones. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, I found a notebook I had carried with me during the worst weeks. It was filled with lists, reminders, and careful notes written in cramped handwriting. Evidence of how hard I had worked just to stay upright. I closed it and didn't put it back in the box. Instead, I started something new. Not a business. Not a project that required permission. Just a quiet fund. Small at first. Modest. Designed to help people who were where I had been, sleeping in cars, holding keys they were afraid to trust, telling themselves survival was temporary while wondering if it ever truly was. I didn't advertise it. I didn't attach my name to it publicly. I just remembered what it felt like to be invisible. And I made sure someone else wouldn't have to stay that way forever. The court order arrived quietly. No ceremony. No drama. Just a clean envelope with language so precise it felt almost kind. A restraining order. Clear boundaries. Names listed correctly. Consequences spelled out without emotion. My home was protected. My finances were secure. My existence was no longer negotiable. I read the document once, then folded it and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not because I needed to reread it, but because I needed to know exactly where it was. Some papers are not about fear. They are about certainty. After that, life didn't suddenly become perfect. It became honest. I stopped living in reaction. I stopped waiting for the next threat. I woke up and made coffee without checking my phone first. I opened the curtains fully. I let the house sound like a house again. Michael noticed the change before I did. "You're walking differently," he said one morning. "Like you're not bracing anymore." He was right. Fear bends your posture without asking permission. Safety slowly gives it back. In the weeks that followed, I made decisions I had been postponing for years. I updated my documents. I reorganized my accounts. I chose who had access to what, and why. For the first time, my boundaries were not implied. They were written. And then I did something small that mattered more than all of it. I used my experience. I started quietly helping people who were where I had been, sleeping in cars, living between addresses, surviving without witnesses. Nothing dramatic. Gas cards. Short-term storage. Legal referrals. A place to charge a phone without being asked questions. I didn't save anyone. I just gave them time. Because time is what someone gave me when my brother placed a key in my hand and didn't ask me to justify my need. That key sits on my nightstand now, even though I don't need it there. It reminds me that one decision, accepting help, can reroute an entire life. This experience taught me something I wish I had learned earlier. Accepting help is not weakness. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. Silence does not keep you safe, clarity does. Some names and details in this story have been changed for privacy and safety. The truth underneath them has not. If this story touched you, leave a comment with your city. Let yourself be seen for a moment. And if you believe that survival, truth, and second chances deserve space in the world, subscribe. Because sometimes, one key really can change everything.